Good morning, crime community. I'm here to continue to read about Aurora Lee. I have no more updates on Donna McElwain. He tried her when she had learned at Sunday school when God was what he wanted from us all, and how in choosing sin we vexed the Christ to go straight home and hear her father pull the name down on us from the thunder shelf when drank away his soul into the dark, from seeing judgment father mother home, where God in heaven reversed to her. The more she knew of right, the more she guessed the wrong. Her price paid down for knowledge was to know the vileness of her kindred through her heart, her filial and tormented heart. Henceforth they struck their blows of virtue. Oh, 'tis hard to learn you have a Father up in heaven, by a gathering certain sense of being on earth. Still worse than orphan, 'tis to grief of grief, having to thank God for such low joy. And so passed Marion's life from year to year. Her parents took her with them when they tramped, dodged lanes and heaths, frequent towns and fairs, and once went farther and saw Manchester, and once the sea and blue end of the world, and fair scrolls, finis of the wicked book, and twice a prison back at intervals, returning to the hills. Hills draw like heaven, and stronger sometimes holding out their hands to pull you from the vile flats upon to them, and through perhaps their strollers strolled back. And sheep do simply that they knew the way. They certainly felt better unaware, emerging from the social smut of towns to wipe their feet clean of the mountain turf, in which long wanderings Marion lived and learned, endured and learned. The people on the roads would stop and ask her why her eyes outgrew her cheeks, if she meant the lodge the birds in all that hair. And when they lifted her, the miller in the cart, a mile or twain, the butcher's boy on horseback, often too, the peddler stopped and trapped her on her head with absolute forefinger, brown and ringed, and asked if peradventure she could read, and when she answered A, would toss her down some stray odd volume from his heavy pack, and Thompson Seasons, Mulcted of the Spring, and half a play of Shakespeare's torn across. He had a guess the bottom of a page, but just the top, sometimes as difficult as sitting on the moon to guess the earth, or else a sheaf of leaves for that small roosts, small gleanings torn out from the hearts of books, from churchyard elegies and Eden's Lost, from Burns and Bunyan and Selkirk and Tom Jones. 'Twas somewhat hard to keep these things distinct, and oft the jangling influence jarred the child, like looking at the sunset full of grace through a pothouse window, while the drunken oaths went on behind her as she weeded out her book leaves, threw away the leaves that hurt, first tore them small, then none should find a word, and made a nosegay of the sweet and good, to fold within her breast a pour upon a broken moment of the noontime glare, and leave, when given her, to untie her cloak and rest upon the dusty highway's bank. And the road's dust are off, the journey's done. Some city friend would lead her by the hand to hear a lecture at an institute, and thus she had grown, this Marion Earl of ours, to no booking learning. She was ignorant of authors, not in earshot of the things outspoken o'er the heads of common men, by men who are uncommon, but within the cadence hum of such, and capable of catching from the fringes of the wind some fragmentary phrases here and there of that fine music which, being carried in to her soul, she reproduced itself afresh to finer motions of the lips and lids. She said, in speaking of it, if a flower were thrown you out of heaven at intervals, you'd soon again attain to a trip of looking up. And so with her, you counted me for years till I felt odd, and then she counted me her sorrow pleasures till I felt ashamed. And she told me she was fortunate and calm of such and such a season, sat and sewed, with no one to break up her crystal thoughts, while rhymes from lovely poems span around their ringing circles of a static tune beneath the moistened fingers of the hour. Her parents called her a strange, sickly child, not good for much, but given to sulk and stare, and smile into the hedges of the clouds, and tremble if one shook her from her fit by any blow or word even. Outdoor jobs went ill with her, and household quiet work she was not born to. Had they kept the North, they might have had their penny worth out of her, like other parents in their factories. Your children work for you, not you for them, or else they better had been choked with air, the first breath drawn. But in this trampling life was nothing to be done with such a child but tramp and tramp, and yet she knitted hose, not ill, but with not dull at needlework, and all her country people gave her pence for darning stockings past their natural age, and patching petticoats from old to new, and other light work done for thrifty wives. One day, said Marian, the sun shone that day. Her mother had been badly beat and felt the bruises sore about her wretched soul. That must have been. She came in suddenly and, snatching in a sort of breathless rage, her daughter's headgear combed, let down the hair upon her like a sudden waterfall, then drew her drenched and passive by the arm. Outside the hut they lived in, when the child could clear her blinded face from all that stream of tresses, there stood a man with beast eyes. They seemed that they would swallow her alive, complete in body and spirit, hair and all, and burning sterous breath that hurt her cheek and breathed so near. The mother held her tight, saying hard beneath her teeth, thy wench, thy squire speaks to you now. Thy squire's too good to means to get you set up, to comfort us, too mannerly at least. The child turned round and looked up pietous at the mother's face. Be sure the mother's deathbed will not want another devil to damn when such a look. O mother, when with desperate glance of heaven, God free me from my mother, she shrieked out. These mothers are too dreadful, and with force as passionate as fear, she tore her hands like lilies from the rocks, from hers and his, and sprang down, bounding headlong down the steep, away from both, away if possible, as far as God, away. They yelled at her, and famished hounds at a hare. She held them yell. She felt his name hiss after her from the hills, like shot from guns, on, and now she had cast the voices with her uplands. Oh, mad fear was returning to her feet and killing the ground. The white roads hurled as if she burnt them up. The green fields melted. Wayside trees fell back and making room for her, and then her head grew vexed. Trees, fields turned on her and ran after her. She heard the quiet pants of the hills behind. Their keen air pricked her neck and had lost her feet, could run no more, yet somehow went as fast. The horizon red twixt steeples in the east. She sucked her forward, while her heart kept swelling, till it swelled so big it seemed to fill her body when it burst and overflowed the world, swamped the light. And now I am dead and safe, thought Marian Earle. She had dropped and she had fainted. As the sense returned, the night was past, the life's night. It was ware of heavy tumbling motions, cracking wheels, and drivers shouting to the lazy team that swung their rankling bells against her brain, while through the wagon's coverture and chinks, the cruel yellow morning pecked at her, alive and dead upon the straw inside, at which her soul ached back into the dark and prayed that no more of that. A wagoner had found her in a ditch beneath the moon, and white as moonshine save her oozing blood. At first he thought her dead, but when he wiped the mouth and heard it sigh, he raised her up and laid her on his wagon in the straw, and so conveyed her to the distant town in which his business called himself, and felt this heap of misery at the hospital. He stirred in place, seemed new and strange as death, and white straight bed, the others straight and white, like graves dug side by side and measured lengths, and quiet people walking in and out, with wonderful low voices and soft steps, and apparitional equal care for each. astonished her with order, silence, law, and when a gentle hand held out a cup, it took it as you do at sacrament, half awed, half melted, not being used indeed, so much love as makes the form of love, and courtesy of manners, delicate drinks, and rare white bread, to which some dying eyes were turned in observation. Oh my God, how sick we must be ere we make men just. I think it frets the saints in heaven to see so many desolate creatures on the earth have learnt the simple dues of fellowship and social comfort in a hospital, as Marion did. She lay there stunned, half tranced, and wished at intervals of growing sense she might be sicker yet, if sickness made the world so marvelous kind, the air so hushed, and all her wake time quiet as asleep. For now she understood, as such things were, how sickness ended very oft in heaven, among the unspoken raptures, yet more sick and surelier happy. Then she dropped her lids, and folding up her hands as flowers at night, would lose no moment of the blessed time. She lay and seized in fever many weeks, and youth was strong and overcame the test. Revolted soul and flesh were reconciled and fetched back to the necessary day, and daylight duties how could creep about, and long bare rooms, and stare out drearily from any narrow window of the street, till someone who had nursed her as a friend could coldly to her as an enemy. She had leave to go next week, being well enough, while only her heart ached. Go next week, she thought. Next week, how would it be with her next week? Let out into the terrible street alone, among the pushing people, to go where? One day, the last before the dreaded last, among the convalescents like her, prepared to go next morning, she sat dumb and heard half absently the woman talk to one who famished for her baby's cheeks. The little wretch would know her, a year old and lively like her father. One was keen and yet to work and fill some clamorous mouths, and one was tender for her dear Goodman, who had missed her sorely, and one querulous would pay bite-backing neighbors who had dared to talk about her as already dead, and one was proud, and if her sweetheart Luke had let her for a rudder's face than hers, the gossip would be seen through at a glance. Sweet riddance, and such sweethearts let him hang. 'Twere good to have been sick for such an end. And while they talked, and Marion felt the worst, and having missed the worst of all these wrongs, the visitor was ushered through the words, and paused among the talkers. When he looked, it was as if he spoke, and when he spoke, he sang perhaps, that Marion, could she tell, she only knew so much she had chronicled, the seraph's might, the making of the sun, and who came and spake was Romney Lee. And when and there she saw and heard him first, and when it was her turn to have the face upon her, all those buzzing pallid lips, being satisfied with comfort, when he changed to Marion, saying, and you're going where? She, moveless as a worm beneath a stone which someone's stumbling foot had spurned aside, rise suddenly, astonished with the light, and breaking into sobs, cried, where I go? None asked me till this moment. Can I say where I go, when it has not seemed worthwhile to God himself, if thinks of every one, to think of me and fix where I shall go? So young, he gentle asked her, you have lost your father and your mother? Both, she said, both lost. My father was burnt up with gin, and ever I sucked milk, and so is lost. My mother sold me to a man last month, and so my mother's lost his manifest, and I who fled from her for miles and miles, and if I had caught sight of the fire of hell through some wild gap, she was my mother, sir, and seems I shall be lost too presently, and so we end, all three of us. Poor child, he said, with such a pity in his voice, it soothed her more than her own tears. Poor child, 'tis simple that betrayal of my mother's love could bring despair to God's too. Yet be taught he better to us than many mothers are, and children cannot wander beyond reach of the sweep of his white raiment, touch and hold, and if you weep, still weep where John was laid while Jesus loved him. She could say the words she told me exactly if he uttered them, and year back, since in any doubt or dark, they came out like the stars and shone on her. With just their comfort, common words perhaps, the ministers in church might say the same. And he made the church with what he spoke. The difference was the miracle, said she. Then catching up her smile to ravishment, he added quickly, I repeat his words, and not his tones can anyone repeat, the music of an organ out of church. And when he said, poor child, I shut my eyes, and how terrible his voice broke through, of the ointment box broke in the holy feet and let out the rich medicative Hennard to tell me how he had raised and rescued her with reverent pity. As in touching grief, he touched the wounds of Christ and made her real, more self-respecting hope to call belief in God, work, worship. Therefore, let us pray, and thus to snatch her soul from atheism and keep it stainless from her mother's face. He sent her to a famous seamstress house far off in London, where to work and hope. With that they parted. She kept sight of heaven, and not to Romney. He had good to do, to others through the days and through the nights. She sewed and sewed and sewed. She groped sometimes and wondered why along the tawny light she struck the new thread into her needle's eye, how people without mothers on the hills could choose the town to live in, when she drew the stitch, and mused how Romney's face would look, as if 'twere likely he'd remember hers when they too had their meetings after death. And that leads us to the end of chapter 3 of Aurora Lee, between Romney and the love life they are achieving. Since we have no update on Donna McElwain, we'll wait for the coroner's report and say, have a nice day, and we find peace and joy and harmony with all the children.